Learning how to craft gear in Path of Exile is one of the most important first steps you take as a player learning the game. Crafting opens up worlds of possibilities in terms of builds you can play and create for yourself. You can usually make better items than you can buy, and almost always at a lower price, usually a lot lower. There's so much to learn and so many overlapping systems with crafting that learning to craft gear is more of an ongoing process than just a simple I know how to do it or I don't know how to do it. Hi, it's Larold, and this is my crafting guide for gear to use with Toxic Rain Pathfinder. It will contain a lot of helpful crafting tips that you can use in playing other builds as well. I've used these techniques in crafting gear for a lot of other builds, like just to give some examples: Self-Ignite Chieftain, Lightning Strike Champion, Cast on Grit, Forbidden Rite Occultist, Death's Oath Occultist, Cyclone Slayer, and tons more. A wide range of builds, to be sure. I realize this video is long. I really don't intend for it to be something you just sit and watch once in one sitting all the way from start to finish. I mean, you can, but I have broken this video into chapters slot by slot so you can bookmark it and come back as needed. I want this to cover crafting gear at all levels. The main emphasis is on in-game Toxic Rain Pathfinder gear, since that is the most relevant and most complicated stuff, but I want this to be useful as a guide from league start all the way to end game, and to have some useful crafting techniques that you can apply to tons of different builds. It's something you can follow along to while playing Toxic Rain. It can help keep you on track and constantly upgrading your character's gear for the entire lifespan of the character, so you never feel like you're stalling at any point. Alright, well, let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, for the majority of this video, we're going to be using the amazing website pathofexile.com to kind of walk through all of the crafts that we do here. The main tools that we're going to be using are the calculator, which we can use to, for example, let's look at a bow. We can look at all the affixes that are available on bows, prefixes and suffixes, and see the relative weights of all of them. We can also use the emulator to, essentially emulate the act of crafting a piece of gear. Now, there are some other really powerful tools on this website that are definitely beyond the purview of this, but there's a lot of really useful information here. There are guides in here, in fact, which is pretty cool. So let's just get started with talking about a weapon. That is kind of the most important thing that you're gonna craft as a Toxic Rain Pathfinder. You want a good bow. For a starter bow, the thing you would use during the campaign, your main focus is gonna be on getting the right gem links. You want either like 3 green at the very start of the campaign, and then 4 green or 3 green and 1 blue, so you could put an efficacy in that blue socket, and obviously you'd want those all to be linked. And that's basically all you really need to get going for most of the campaign. Now, if you have some options, you would prefer a weapon that is faster. The highest possible attack speed is preferable with those good links, and the base bows that have the best attack speed are short bow, grove bow, and thicket bow. They all have an attack speed, a base attack speed of 1.5 attacks per second. Now, they make up for that by having like terrible crit chance and very low damage rolls, but none of that matters with Toxic Rain. It's only just about how quickly you can shoot those pods out, so that higher attack speed is a lot better than some of these other bows. In general, when you're doing the campaign, if you can just get those sockets onto one of these bases, that's great. If you can bench craft attack speed onto it, that is even better. Just a basic bench crafted attack speed bow with just a good base and some decent links will carry you all the way through the campaign. Now, once you've made it through the campaign, I'll go ahead and swap over here. Your first main upgrade that you're going to be looking for is this bad boy right here. My favorite unique. It's just a very basic generic unique. It's Quill Rain. I'll go ahead and slap that in and throw Toxic Rain in it. And as you can see, just an absurd amount of attack speed with this weapon. Now, it comes with the downside. Obviously, it has the 100% increased attack speed upside, so a base of 3 attacks per second, which is crazy. Comes with the downside of 30% less damage. So it's not like a viable long-term weapon option, but it's really good for starting out. And you can just run with this on a 4-link for a while and use it to either farm like low-level heists or low-level maps, especially low-level essence farming in maps, so that you can establish some currency, do some chaos recipe, and make your way toward crafting other better pieces of gear. A 4-link or a 5-link on this is totally fine. You can go a long way with a 4 or 5-linked Quill Rain, considering how cheap they are at league start. They're really not that expensive. And yeah, that's a pretty good starting point. All right, let's go ahead and open up the wiki, Path of Exile wiki, because that is our first big bow craft. Here we're going to look for the porcupine card, because this will be our first big bow craft. It's very simple. You just want to get your hands on 6 porcupines. This will probably be the very first thing that you do once you've finished the campaign, gotten a quill rein, started to establish some currency. You've got 100 chaos in the bank, or less than that potentially. You get yourself your hands on 6 porcupines. Depending on when you are in the league, that may be 30 chaos for a full set of them. It may be 60 or 80, but not particularly expensive for a first weekend 6-link short bow. And that's really all you need. You can just buy these, or you can farm some frankly pretty terrible maps to get them. Courtyard, Gardens, Orchard, Plaza, and Terrace are where they drop. They also drop in the High Gardens, which is the area where you go to fight Yugal in Act 8. So you may get lucky and get one of these while you're doing the campaign, but obviously I wouldn't hang out there and try to get it. So we'll show off our first craft here. When you hand those into whoever your div card hand-in person of preference is, you're going to get an item level, not a thicket bow. Here we go. We'll start with a 2-handed weapon, a bow. It will be a short bow, item level 50. And part of the reason why I like to do a little bit of low-level essence farming early on in a league is it'll give you some dread essences. Now, dread essences, if we tab back into the game here, dread essences have the exact same affix for bows when they're a shrieking, like a tier 2 one, as they do as a tier 1 one, a deafening dread essence. And that is to give you +2 to level of socketed bow gems. So you can actually take the tier 2, the cheaper one, and just slap it onto this until you, at the very minimum, get a free suffix. Now you can just slap one on. If you have a free suffix, you can just come down and craft attack speed onto your bow. If I can find it here. Tier 1 crafted attack speed, maybe roll that a couple of times until you get 13%. A few times, I guess. And there you go. That is an amazing starter bow. That can take you all the way to getting 2 watchstones pretty reasonably. And, you know, it might have cost you maybe 60 chaos for the full set of porcupine cards, and then like a few chaos for a dread essence. Now, if you wanted this to be a little bit more optimized, we can actually look here in the calculator just to kind of show off the weights on some of the affixes, and we'll type in item level 50 here just to filter out all the affixes that would be, or modifiers that would be higher than item level 50 requirement. And we can see that the max attack speed, T1 attack speed, only has a required item level of 37, which is pretty amazing. So if we wanted to tap dread essences onto this bow until we got at least one of these, like even if it's a tier 3 attack speed, that's still the same as the crafted attack speed. But if we could get a tier 2 or a tier 1, that would be even better. And, you know, that might take us a little bit here, but if we were to tap these on here just until we get like an attack speed, hey, there we go. That looks pretty great. Now, unfortunately, we did get fully loaded suffixes, but let's just say for the sake of being lucky, let's just say we got like just 2 suffixes and 2 prefixes. There we go. Don't know why that's... What are we doing here? Oh, I'm chaosing. Great. All right, so let's just say that we roll dread essences on this for a while until we get a natural, like a native attack speed roll on that suffix. Let's say it's like a tier 2, and then we have whatever on the prefixes. As long as we're getting that dread essence +2 socketed bow gems, that's kind of all we care about for prefixes. If we have at least room to craft 1 free suffix there, and we have the base attack speed, then we could come down and we could just actually type in chaos, and we were going to look for chaos damage over time multiplier, and you can just craft that on. And there you go. This is a really, really nice, very inexpensive bow to get you pushing toward red maps and some of the end game. Now, this isn't going to be your long-term goal bow, but, you know, +2 socketed bow gems, that'll give you 2 levels to Toxic Rain, which is pretty good, and then you'd have baseline attack speed on it, which is better than you're able to craft, and then a crafted chaos dot multi, which is pretty nice. All right, now let's take a look at the actual preferred end-game bow. And this will be the last bow you really ever need as a Toxic Rain Pathfinder. This is the bow that you can use to clear. I usually will do the first 2 watchstones. Maybe I'll craft this bow before I get my first 2 watchstones, but usually I will get the first 2 watchstones with that short bow, that cheapo 6-link short bow that I just crafted with dread essences. But I will get my 3rd and 4th watchstone with this, a proper thicket bow, and you want this to be at least item level 78. And the reason we want that is we want this prefix increased chaos damage over time, which has a minimum item level of 78. Now, the thing that's nice here is it doesn't have to be 78, but because we are shooting for a 78 item level bow, we're filtering out a handful of other modifiers, like all of these increased elemental damage with attack skills, just things that we don't want, you know, added chaos damage that all require item levels higher than 78. We don't really need any of that. And what we're specifically looking to do here is, if we just go ahead and throw this into the emulator, a thicket bow that is 78, and you could do this with a short bow or a grove bow as well. What you'll want to do before you do anything else is you'll buy this, you'll pick it up, you'll slap an alk on it, and then you will fossil craft it up to at least 24 quality. That is super important because what we're then going to do is we're going to come over to the harvest bench, the horticrafting station. We're going to type in enchant here, enchant weapon. Specifically, we're going to put this enchant on it. Enchant a weapon, it does not, quality doesn't increase its physical damage, but it increases its attack speed by 1% per 8% quality. So if you have 24% quality, you'll get 3% attack speed. That number doesn't round up. So at 23% quality, it only gives you 2% attack speed. So you can't get your weapon over 30% quality, so you can only get 3. And if for some reason, somehow you botch this, that's okay. You can take this over to, if we type in Hillock here, Hillock the blacksmith. If you do syndicate and you get Hillock into transportation, which we'll talk to Jun, she's right here for convenience sake. If you have Hillock anywhere in transportation at all, he could even be rank 1 in transportation. If you do a transportation hideout, and you can then get him to craft your weapon up to 24 quality without re-rolling any of the mods, and that would also be a way to get yourself up to 24 quality. But that is quite a bit more effort than just slapping some perfect fossils on and getting it to 25 or 24 plus quality. All right, once you've done that, now you just want to roll it until you have a tier 1 attack speed modifier. And so just to make sure, I think I said this, but just to make sure, you're wanting this to be a base that is already a 6-linked item level 78 plus thicket bow. And you can use a split beast with the menagerie to recover its cost. If it's a cheap one that you're buying early in a league, it probably is already split and it will have the split tag on it. And so then that doesn't really matter. You can go with a higher item level, totally fine. It just adds more mods to have to deal with. And you're just going to be sitting here doing this very annoying thing of you're going to type in attack speed into your search, like into this window here in your stash. Well, you know, you'll type in attack speed, or technically you'll probably type in, I think Zeal is the name of the T1 mod specifically. So you'll be typing in that, whatever the name of the T1 mod is, but let's just say speed. And then you'll just be sitting here tapping alts on it over and over and over and over and over again. And we can actually look at the chance of getting that mod with an alteration, orb of alteration in the calculator. We come here and we click increased attack speed, T1 specifically, and we can scroll back up just using alts, not doing alt and augment, even just alting alone. 254 tries. So somehow that costs 184 orbs of alteration. Don't know that, whatever, don't get that math, but okay. 20 chaos at this point in the league, probably a good bit more early on in a league. But the point is, you just sit here and you spam until you get T1 attack speed as the suffix. Not really that complicated or all that expensive once you've built up a decent supply of alts. So we'll just go ahead and say we rolled it instead of sitting here and doing that for a couple hundred more times. Oh, we got it. Now you basically have two options. If you feel lucky and you kind of want to do things the cheap way, then you can just proceed from here. If you don't feel lucky, and I usually don't, you can buy some Krykic Chimerals. You'll need at least one, maybe a couple, depending on how lucky you are. And those can be expensive, especially later on in a league. They're quite expensive because they're used in high-level crafting. For me, I just like it as a way to prevent myself from having to go back and spam alts until I get attack speed rolls, but it is a lot more expensive. It's definitely a trade of currency for time. So what you do is you throw that in the menagerie, and I think I even have one in my menagerie here if I just want to go there and show off. You will go to your blood altar and imprint. Yep, you create an imprint of a magic item, so you'll slap that in here, hit craft, you'll kill the beasts, and then an imprint will drop. And if for some reason you botch it, like, okay, I'm just gonna botch it real hard here. Okay, great. You can apply the imprint, you right click it and click the item again, and then it will go back to the way it was when you had imprinted it. So we'll make an imprint here again, right, we're back to, here we are. We have our base, and what we're looking to do is get this up to rare with only an attack speed modifier on it. So the way that we have to do that is we have to annul off the prefix, and we have to regal it up to rare and then annul off the new mod. So what we want to do is we want to annul. Yeah, okay, so this is why I prefer to imprint instead of sitting and alt spamming, but it does get more expensive this way. Again, we make another imprint and we annul. We did it, nailed it. Now for me, I would take this imprint, and you can actually vendor the imprint to just an NPC for a regret orb, which is fun. I usually like to do that, throwing away 60, 80, however many chaos each time you're doing that at the league start. I would make another imprint at this point. So now you can come back to just a attack speed base. Definitely a lot more expensive to do it this way than to just be like, I think I can nail all this stuff, but it saves you having to spam alts a whole bunch. All right, so now we're going to slap a regal on and then hope that we can annul. Nailed it. Awesome. All right, at this point you can take this imprint and you can just vendor this as well or throw it away. So you're set. You're home free. Everything from this point on is deterministic. We have our T1 attack speed, thicket bow with nothing else on it. That's exactly what we want. So we go to the crafting bench and we put on two crafted modifiers. We put on up to 3 crafted modifiers and cannot roll attack mods. These are both suffixes, and now we've filled up all of our suffixes. So an important note here is that basically the way that tags work. All mods have some sort of associated tag with them, or almost all of them. There are some that don't, that are like impossible to force on, but things basically obey sets of rules based on their tags. So we'll click attack here, and this will show all of the mods that are attack mods. And I'll go ahead and knock out this item level here. Right, so these are all the mods that are attack mods. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of suffixes. The struck out ones are ones that are not attack mods. There are a lot of suffixes that are not attacks. But there's literally only one prefix that is not an attack mod, and that is +1 to level of socketed gems, which is a modifier we want. So we can take an exalt and it will deterministically add +1 to level of socketed gems as long as we have this cannot roll attack mods and we don't have any empty suffix slots available. That is all that will be added. And then if you try to throw more exalts on there, there will be no more mods available to add into the pool, period. That's it. That is the only thing you can get. So we do that, and then we look at our hunter, our set of hunter affixes, and it's the same situation. There are all these different mods that are attack mods, and then there is one, which is the one we want, that is not an attack mod, and that is increased chaos damage over time. So we take a hunter exalted orb, we slap that bad boy on there, and at this point, if you're happy with the mod you got, the roll you got on that hunter prefix, you can go to the crafting bench, which I will do in game just to show off here. Now I will not be destroying my nice weapon, but if you scroll all the way down on the crafting bench, there is remove crafted mods, and it only costs 1 scouring orb. So that's what you'll do. You will, it's not in the emulator because it doesn't need to be, but you will go to the crafting bench and remove crafting mods, and that will remove both of these 2 bad boys here. And it'll leave you with a weapon that looks like this. +1 to level of socketed gems, increased chaos damage over time. Those are your 2 prefixes, and then T1 attack speed as your suffix. Now what you want to do is you want to craft, can have up to 3 crafted mods, and then you will craft chaos damage over time multiplier as a T1 crafted suffix, and +2 to level of socketed support gems as your final prefix, and you're done. That is your weapon. If you were unhappy with the hunter prefix that you got and you wanted to sit there and play with that and throw some currency away, instead of doing that, instead of removing those mods, what you could do is you have this can have up to 3 crafted mods, can't roll attack mods. You would instead come down and craft suffixes cannot be changed as your final prefix. Then you would hit it with a scour. Now, because suffixes can't be changed is a prefix that will be removed by a scour, but it also makes it so that your suffixes aren't changed. So you have your baseline T1 attack speed, your +3 crafted mods, your multi-mod, and your can't roll attack mods. So those won't be removed. So we'll do this. And now we can try again to see if we can get a better roll on that hunter mod. Now, because the weapon is already a hunter weapon at this point from having put a hunter exalted orb on it, we don't have to use hunter exalted orbs to get that increased chaos damage over time again. We could just use 2 regular exalted orbs and try for a better roll on that hunter prefix. Again, if we weren't happy, we could come back down, craft suffixes cannot be changed, then scour. Really important not to, like, I'll show off. If I forget to craft suffixes can't be changed, I just bricked the weapon now. So we can just continue to do that until we are, we can just continue to do that until we are happy with the prefix that we get. If we can get a +1, tier 1 or a tier 2 on that hunter chaos damage over time. T2 is 80 to 89. T1 is only 90 to 94. So T1 is not nearly worth the effort. It is very low weight. T2 is a really like totally acceptable settle. And then at this point you would go back and you would remove all of the crafted mods and then do all the same stuff before. Craft up to 3 crafted modifiers, chaos damage over time as a suffix, and what is it? Support gems. Level of support gems as a prefix, and there you go. That's a little bit better bow than the one we made before. Definitely cost quite a bit more with having to make it so that we couldn't change suffixes and then scour several times. Quite a bit more expensive, but ultimately that is your end game. You're set for life. Thicket bow, that's all you need for doing everything. Ubers, you can do Ubers with a bow like this. So there you go. There is one other alternative that people will use. It does make things a little easier to deal with mana wise. You do need to get the quality up on it to at least 24. I am looking for it. It is a Widow Hail. I guess I don't have one. That is kind of crazy. But it is, maybe I have one in my bag. Nope, it is just a weapon that increases the quality of the effects associated with your quiver. And it can roll all the way up to 250%, I believe. We'll just look at it on the wiki here. There we go, 250% increase bonus is gained from equipped quiver. This is a crude bow, so the base attack speed is a bit lower. You would obviously want to get this up to 24 quality, enchant it, and you would want this to be a 249 or a 250%. Like, this needs to be very nearly perfect, and you would need a truly insane quiver for this to be competitive with just running that normal thicket bow. And this is massively more expensive when it has perfect rolls than that thicket bow. Thicket bow, overall cost of that craft is a bare minimum of 5 divines, and like 1 exalt and a hunter exalt, probably more like 10 to 12 divines to craft a really pretty good one, which is, I mean, not that expensive at league start, whereas a Widow Hail that is like 250 is going to be substantially more expensive. But it is something to consider if you're going into like true, you know, Uber boss total end game setup. All right, now let's cover quivers. That's the thing that you need to have with your bow, right? So our most basic quiver craft, our most basic quiver that we're going to run is probably just something that we pick up off the ground or maybe buy from another player early on in a league for very cheap. And if we look, there are tons of quiver bases, tons of different implicits available on quivers. And there's literally only one that's any good for this build, and that is the broadhead arrow quiver. It gives you baseline attack speed as the implicit. It's pretty good. And that's really all you need. So as for affixes that you want on this, it's pretty simple in an early build, early piece of gear. You're just looking for resources like resistances and primary stats, strength, int, life. If you can get a free suffix, like I just kind of tapped this one a couple of times. I got max life. I got a pretty bad increased damage with bow skills roll. That's fine. Got a T1 light res. And then with all of this, I would then come on here and I would crafted attack speed 7 to 12. I would roll that a couple times until I got to 12% attack speed crafted. But honestly, this is pretty legit for like first couple of days of the league. Quiver, this totally works for me. Now let's talk about a sort of a mid-game quiver. This would be the step that you would take between that quiver, which, you know, maybe has a couple of good stats, has good life, has crafted attack speed, but then also probably has some totally dead stats as well. Once again, we're starting with a broadhead arrow quiver. That's the only one. Don't know why it's tongue-tying me, but that's the only one that you use. So you'd want to use at least an item level 82 base, and preferably you would want this to have a fractured damage over time multiplier. That's this right here, damage over time multiplier with attack skills is the full name of it. That is different from just the stat damage over time multiplier. Important in like searching for items to make sure you're looking for damage over time multiplier with attack skills. Now it doesn't need to be T1. T1 is obviously better than T2 or T3. And it's more expensive. So if you're able to get like a T2 one or a T3 one that's within your budget, pretty cheap and is fractured, specifically, you are looking for that to be fractured. Fractured items are kind of a huge part of a lot of crafting strategies. They really make it so that it's very easy to configure all the rest of the stats around it by having one thing locked in. So you would start with this and we'll just wriggle it up so that it is rare. And what we're going to do is we're going to slap it with Essences of Woe. Now we are specifically going to use Essences of Woe, which give increased damage with bow skills. And the reason for that is you basically have like three main prefixes or three main stats that you really want on your quiver. And they are increased damage with bow skills, life, and attack speed. I mean, I guess 4, you want damage over time multiplier with attack skills, but that's kind of obviously going to be there since it's fractured on. So you could get increased damage with attack skill or with bow skills, just like randomly, chaos it or whatever until you get it. You could use Essences of Zeal to force on a slightly higher attack speed, but the thing is that the crafted attack speed goes up to 12%, and Essences of Zeal, T1 Essences of Zeal are super expensive early on in a league, and you're only getting like, 2 to 4% more attack speed out of them, whereas there is no way to force on increased damage with bow skills. The weight on it is not high, as you can see here, less than 1% weight for each rank. So by forcing that on with Essences of Woe, which are usually not very expensive early on in a league, you can have this guaranteed really good stat or really good roll on a useful stat, and then you basically just slap it until you get max life, and then hopefully you have a suffix free so you can craft attack speed on. Like, that would be my goal here, is I would slap Essences of Woe until I was happy with the life roll and I had room to craft attack speed. And let's say I had like a situation like this where let's just throw another, like, what is okay, here's a really nice bad roll, right? I would try to annul that bow attacks fire an additional arrow off. That is a particularly bad stat, so I would want to remove that. And oh my god, how lucky am I? So we do that on the first shot. That's great. If we had missed and we'd hit like the life or the damage with bow skills, I would just tap it with more Essences of Woe until I got one that I wanted to craft attack speed onto. And then you just craft until you have 12% attack speed. And this quiver will take you like literally all the way through getting your watchstones, and you'll be set until you want to craft an absolutely god tier quiver, which we're going to go over that any second now. I want this to have 12% attack speed on it. There we go. All right. Pretty good quiver. Always make sure if you have some useful implicit to Blessed Orbit up to max level. All right, great. Looks pretty good. Now let's cover a truly god tier quiver, and before we even start, I will just give an explicit warning here. This is expensive. This is expensive and painful. Okay, so first things first, we are going to start with an item level 86 Hunter Broadhead Arrow Quiver. Now you can buy a regular quiver and then hit it with a Hunter Exalted Orb. That may be cheaper. It usually is not, but check the prices, see if you can find a steal, whatever. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Harvest bench and you are going to do Reforge Chaos over and over and over again. And the reason is, if we reset here to an item level 86 quiver, as soon as the website, all right, there we go. Quiver, Broadhead Arrow, item level 86, all that stuff is set up correctly, and Hunter. Okay, if we tap Chaos, these are the possible things that can be guaranteed by a Chaos Harvest Reforge craft. You could get the Chaos prefix, a Chaos damage over 2 attacks prefix, which is worthless. You can get Chaos Res, okay, or you have about a little bit over 25% chance to get Chaos damage over time multiplier with attack skills. This is the one that we want. It is only half that to get T1, which is obviously what we want. And so what we're going to do is we are going to just spam craft on the crafting bench, on the harvest crafting bench, this Chaos Reforge until we get a T1 Chaos damage over time multiplier multiplier with attack skills, and a T1 damage over time multiplier with attack skills, just the regular one. This can be painful, and so you want to just keep spamming and spamming and spamming that harvest juice. Did I just roll over one? No, unfortunately not. And you just keep going until you are happy with the suffixes that you have. You have those two suffixes together. And then what you need is a free suffix. This is particularly annoying to have Zeal on there, but you have to have a free suffix to continue this craft. So what we would need to do here is we would need to annul and hope that we hit the attack speed, which is kind of painful. It didn't happen. There we go. Okay, so now at this point, what you want to do is you want to craft cannot roll attacks. That is really important here. Similar to the way that we had crafted the bows prefixes, we're using the cannot roll attacks in order to force a couple of prefixes on. Now, if we look here, the mods that correspond to attack are almost everything on the prefixes on a quiver. The only ones that aren't attack flagged are increased damage with bow skills, which we want, maximum life, which we want, increased move speed from Hunter, which we want, and projectiles pierce additional targets, which is worthless. So what we would want to do here is, and this is a weird interaction with cannot roll attack modifiers, is if you hit an annul on something that has cannot roll attack modifiers on it, you are not capable of annulling the attack mods. So like that doesn't count for scours. Like, check it out, boom, I just scoured it, it worked normally. But if I tap an annul, it is guaranteed to hit either the life prefix or the crafted prefix every time. Now it's important not to like repeatedly slam it, because you will hit those two damage over time and chaos damage over time with attack skills mods. But what we're looking to do is we're looking to strip off all the prefixes, essentially. I mean, if we had a really nice life roll, like if this is T1, that's fine, we can leave that. And then what we're basically going to do is we're just going to sit here and play the worst game in the world, Exalt Annul, which it can be kind of fun. And you're just going to exalt and try to get good damage with bow skills prefixes, and if you don't like them, try to annul them, and then repeat that with life, and repeat that with move speed, and that is pretty good other than the damage with bow skills. And what you're looking to do here is basically just exalt annul, and anytime that you would hit cannot roll attack modifiers, you're gonna have to recraft that, and you just keep doing. I mean, that's okay. So in practicing for talking through this, it took me like forever to actually exalt annul like even anything remotely decent. And of course, in doing it live, I slammed my way through in like a matter of no time. That's great. Yeah, we'll bless this up to 10% implicit attack speed. But basically, you just exalt annul, and then you just go until you're happy with the state of the prefixes on the quiver. Just do that over and over again until you are happy with them. Absurd. It's my lucky day, clearly. And then whenever you feel like, you know, these prefixes are pretty good, then you would craft attack speed onto the suffix until you get 12%. And I mean, you know, who knows how long that'll take? Longer than getting perfect prefixes, right? Anyways, once you've finally gotten that all done, you will have yourself an absolutely beautiful quiver. The kind of quiver that you definitely want to take to go kill Ubers with, or do some sort of insane farm strategy with. All right, now let's move on to jewelry, and we'll start with the amulet. That is kind of the most important piece here. And as far as amulets go, you generally want to use an agate amulet as your standard base, and the reason for that is it has strength and intelligence, and strength and intelligence are the two primary stats that you kind of struggle to get your hands on. You're not required to use an agate amulet. I mean, any amulet can work. Onyx amulets are also totally fine. Citron or turquoise can be okay, but agate just, you know, it has the stats that you want. So that is generally your preferred base. And for a starter amulet, you know, you're not looking for anything fancy. When you hit max, well, not max level, but when you finish the campaign, you are basically just looking for like any old amulet that has life, stats, resistances, whatever. And if you start unveiling some items and you get the minus mana cost of skills prefix, craft, non-channeling skills have minus to total mana cost. If you can craft that onto your prefixes, get a nice -7 to the cost of your toxic rain, that certainly helps a lot. Ultimately, yeah, this right here that I've crafted is absolutely terrible. Let's try that again a little bit, see if we can at least get something with like life on it or whatever. Usually I will just buy one of these from some other player, just something with life resistances, or, you know, maybe it'll just be something I find on the ground. That also works. It's got stats, you know, it's got int, it's got strength. I could craft life onto this and call it a day. That would be fine. One important thing here, though, is that you kind of want to look at the difference in tiers of life on an item. Like, let's type in life here on this amulet. Here we go. Life. All right, so we can see that the crafted life, what does a crafted life go up to? It goes up to 55. On jewelry, it goes up to 55 on Quiver. Not a lot. When you look at the actual base life roll, the standard T1 life roll is quite a bit higher. It goes all the way up to 89. That's a pretty significant difference. Now, a lot of the armor pieces, helm, gloves, chest, boots, the difference between a T1 crafted roll of like a cap of 70 and then a T1 actual roll like 99, the difference there is quite a bit lower. So for a lot of the jewelry pieces, Quiver, that kind of thing, you really would prefer to get a baseline life roll on them. And for a lot of the armor pieces, it's kind of okay to settle with a crafted life roll. And that's sort of the case here. I mean, ultimately, at the start of the league, you'll take whatever you can get that gives you some life, though. So you do this, whatever. Let's say we got a life roll finally. And that's pretty much all I feel like I would need. Just some basic resistances, bit of life, maybe some int, strength, whatever. That'll work. Now let's talk about getting our first real crafted amulet, the thing that kind of helps us transition out of the very basic starter gear, the bare minimum, into more realistic stuff that we're going to be using to kill, like Uber Elder, that sort of thing. So our first item will be a +1 chaos skills amulet. We are going to want to start with a Citron amulet, and the way that we want to approach this is we just want to chaos spam until we get damage over time multiplier. Now, it's crazy to think that like chaos spam really is the right approach, but if we close that search here, damage over time multiplier is, let's find it here. Damage over time multiplier doesn't really have any tags. It has damage as a tag, which there's not a way to force damage tags. So the best way to get this multiplier is, this modifier is literally just a chaos spam for it. We could say like a T1 or a T2 would be acceptable to us. How many chaos orbs does that take? 81 chaos orbs. That's not too bad of a price. Now, if you can buy one and it has an empty prefix and it has like okay other stats and maybe it's, you know, it's within your budget, that works, right? That's also completely fine. Ultimately, what you're looking for is damage over time multiplier as a suffix, and then if any of the other suffixes are good at all, that's great. We'll just go ahead and kind of want to have one. Okay, great. This is perfect, actually. All right, so let's say we have this one with int and strength here and damage over time multiplier. Let's say it's a T1. We don't care about the prefixes. As long as we have a free prefix, that's really all that matters. So what we are looking to do here is we are looking to craft suffixes can't be changed. So now suffixes can't be changed. We are going to do a harvest reforge craft, a reforge chaos craft, because if we look at the prefixes here and we just hit chaos here, there's only one chaos prefix available, and that is +1 to level of all chaos skill gems. So if we reforge chaos and all of our suffixes are filled, we're guaranteed to get +1 to level of chaos skill gems. So we do want to have all of our suffixes filled. Like if we had an empty suffix and we had suffixes can't be changed, they can't be changed, but they can still be added. So if we reforged chaos, we could get chaos res, right? We don't want that. We do want to have all of our suffixes filled. And then we just do one harvest reforge chaos, and now we have guaranteed chaos +1 to level of all chaos skill gems as a prefix, and then whatever our other suffixes were, int, strength, damage over time multiplier, looking pretty good. And that's basically all we have to do at this point, right? We can just we can craft life if we want, that's okay, or we could craft. I think the best thing to craft on here is probably like mana, just to block it, slap an exalt on and just hope I hit a chaos. Slap an exalt on Hope we get a good life roll. We didn't. Oh well, I guess it's better than none. And then do non-channeling skills have minus mana cost. And that's a pretty decent neck, other than that annoyingly crappy life roll. I think that's pretty decent. And then of course we would have wanted to Blessed Orbit up to 24 to both stats. And that's pretty good. That is a neck that'll take you a long way. Now let's talk about how to craft a +2 neck. With a +2 neck, you're going to want to start with an item level 82 amulet, a agate amulet. Once again, here we go, mousing right over it, item level 82. And it doesn't want to be, you don't want to have it be influenced because it needs to be fractured. You want a fractured damage over time multiplier. So the thing we were just chaos spamming to get our hands on, we just want that fractured right off the rip. These can be expensive depending on how good the roll is. So, you know, if you're willing to settle for like a lower end of a T1, that's okay. I would say generally speaking, anything below like 23% to damage over time multiplier, you probably don't want to do this craft on that because it is quite expensive and it is extremely irritating. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit here and we're going. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to spam alts until we get this prefix modifier that I hit in like 3 alts. It usually takes a couple thousand. You know, so that's pretty cool. What we're looking for is +1 to all skill gems. All skill gems. There is no way to force this on. It is a gem modifier. There's not anything we can do to make this easy to get our hands on. We just have to sit there and alt spam our way to it. And as we can see here, alt spamming our way to it I mean, we have a fractured suffix, so there is no way to alt and aug. It's just alt spam until you get it. And it says about 2,580 tries is the expected amount of work required to get this. I got it in 3 in the emulator, so that's cool. Okay, at this point, our goal is to get 2 suffixes total. 2 suffixes, and then cast lock prefix. So we'll hit it with a regal and hope that we get a suffix. We didn't, we got a prefix, that's okay. What we're gonna do here is we're going to craft a prefix. It doesn't matter what, it could be anything, plus mana, great. And then we will slap an exalt on it just to force on a suffix. All right. Now we are going to craft these suffix. Prefixes cannot be changed. This will lock our prefixes in. So it unfortunate that we got this fizz attack damage leached his mana. This is pretty worthless, but that's fine. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the harvest crafting bench and we're not going to reforge chaos. We're going to do an add remove chaos. And I'll show that in game real quick here. This is a remove. This is a substantially more expensive craft. Chaos. It's not this 100 Vivid Life Force reforge. It is add a new chaos modifier and then remove another random modifier from a non-influenced item. And this costs a Sacred Crystallized Life Force, which depending on when you are in the league, at the very early phases of the league, there can be a couple of divines. Right now, pretty deep into the league, since they're useful for a lot of expensive deterministic crafts like this, they're like 6 or 8 divines or something like that. Pretty expensive. Also a ton of life force, as you can see. But this is deterministic. So what it will do is it will craft a chaos prefix on. As we know from before, there is exactly 1 chaos prefix that is capable of being crafted, +1 to all, +1 to chaos skill gems. Then it will remove another modifier. Now it can't change prefixes, so it can't remove any of the prefixes. So it can only remove one of these 2 suffixes, since it can't remove the deterministic, the fractured one. It's going to remove either the lightning res or the crafted modifier. So we tap this, add remove chaos, it adds a chaos and it removes the crafted modifier, which is fine. And now you could just craft on whatever suffix you like. I generally would go with like, you know, if I need a stat, you can craft on whatever, a crafted stat. Strength int is a pretty good option generally. Or if you needed resistances, you could do cold and chaos, lightning and chaos, something like that. You can also do attack and cast speed. That's an okay roll there as well. Get yourself 6% attack speed as a suffix. Now, if you had been a little luckier, let's say we had a nice clean, just +1/+1 set of prefixes and just like the damage over time multiplier suffix, we could do another meta craft where we could craft on a prefix. I guess technically speaking, we could, if we had like just a totally blank weapon or totally blank item here, we could do a multi-craft. Prefixes can't be changed, and then make sure that we fill that prefix with something, just whatever. non-channeling mana skills, whatever. And then since we have prefixes locked, we could come harvest Reforge Chaos, and this would be specifically a Reforge, so that we would then be forcing Chaos Res onto our suffixes because the prefixes can't be changed and we filled them up, so it can't add one either. So we can do something like that, get a guaranteed Chaos Res, still have the non-channeling skills have minus mana costs, and then just slap an Exalto on and hope for the best there at the end if you really want to do it that way. Or you can just sit there and just keep spamming, keep reforging with the same craft. Prefixes can't be changed. Just try until you get a acceptable set of suffixes. But ultimately, I think once you have the +1/+1 and then some other good crafted modifier and the fractured dot multi, you're basically set. Now, there is one incredibly insane, super high level craft that you can do as well for an amulet, and that is to use a -1 prefix, -2 suffix focused amulet. And the way that you craft this is, this is a base that is extremely expensive, and you can't alt mod roll it at all because, as you can see here, if we scour it down and make it magic, it has -1 prefix, which means it has 0 prefixes, and -2 suffixes, so 0 suffixes. So can't play with it as a magic item. You have to just sit and chaos roll it. And you have to do the unenviable task of chaos rolling until you get +1 all skill gems, which is, pretty brutal. It's going to cost you a massive amount, but it will have the benefit of being a +2 level of all skill gems. Now what you would need to do from here with the +1 all skill gems and then just 2 other rolls is you would need to win the annul roll twice. You would have to annul 2 times in a row and not hit all skill gems either time. Yeah, which is, hard. Some might even say it's impossible, but it's not. We found a way to do it. At this point, what you would want to do is craft the prefixes cannot be changed. That modifier right there. You would want to then harvest add remove chaos. So you force on chaos skill gems prefix. So now you have a +4 neck. And then you have to craft the suffix on, and the only way to get a good suffix deterministically is to use a Hinakora's Lock and then Hunter Exalt on this right here, chaos damage over time multiplier tier 1. And the odds of getting that are not great. If we look at that here, let's reset to jewelry amulet. And we'll go with what is this? A simplex amulet? Nope, focused amulet. All right, so we are saying we want this right here. Chaos damage over time multiplier tier 1. Add this influence. With a Hunter's Exalted Orb, our chances of getting that are 1 in 19. Not great. So we would need to Hinakora's Lock and check, and I don't really know of a great way to randomize in between each Hinakora's Lock. I think you would tap it with a Divine. I think that would remove the Hinakora's Lock, and then you could relock and see if it had changed. And that would be it. You would just, I think, probably Divines would be what you'd have to use to waste. Maybe you could try Blessed Orbs. I don't have one of these amulets on hand to play with because they're quite expensive and I don't really have much of a use for them, but that would be it. You would do that over and over again, and you would blow through several mirrors worth of currency trying to make this absolutely god tier neck. And if you did eventually do so, that would be pretty cool. I have to say, definitely a mirror tier neck. And then, once you got a tier 1 chaos dot multi on it, you would then absolutely divine spam until you hit 40 on the suffix. And then there you go. Show it off to Reddit, get a billion karma for that because that's an absolutely insane neck. All right, now we've made it through the really difficult crafts, and now we're going to move on to some of the, I wouldn't say less painful, but certainly some of the less time-consuming or less complicated crafts. So we're going to move on to a belt, which, yeah, okay, this is definitely still a little bit in the pain camp, but not nearly as bad as the amulet stuff or like alt spamming to get plus 1 to all skills or anything like that. So as for belts, at League Start, the general consensus is everyone should use a Stygian Vice all the time, right? It has the socket in it. The socket can have multiple stats, up to 4 stat rolls, life, primary stats, or resistances, or attack speed, or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Using a heavy belt or a leather bolt early on in a league, totally acceptable, totally fine. They're pretty good. Like, getting up to 35 strength is pretty nice, getting up to 40 base life is pretty good. Both totally acceptable options, alternatives to Stygian vises that cost substantially less, even for really good stats on them, just because there's such a stigma around having to have a Stygian vice and everything else being trash. On the subject of trash, all the rest of the belts basically are trash. Vanguard belt is like, okay, that's a fair amount of armor and evasion rating, but it doesn't really matter for Toxic Rain Pathfinder. Crystal belt, energy shield belts, they don't really do anything. Stun block recovery, stun duration on enemies, and increased global fizz damage are all basically worthless, and Golden Obi isn't like a real belt that you can get. So yeah, I kind of generally prefer heavy belts early on in a league just because it helps so much with getting your stats fixed. Even though it's definitely worse than Stygian Vice, the cost relative to the good stats on it is so much lower that it's kind of okay to start with just a very basic belt. And really all you want at league start is, as kind of always with these things, some sort of good life roll and some good resistances, and I mean, if you can get some stats on it, some strength on it, that's great too. Now, in terms of actually crafting yourself a nice belt, we kind of have a problem here. If we look at the stats that we want, there's increased flask charges gained and reduced flask charges used. These are both great stats. They are linked with each other. Like, if you get one of them, you can't have the other. Like, let's just go ahead and scour this belt and just regal it up so we can throw one of these on here. Okay, increased flask charges gained. You see reduced flask charges used just became unavailable. And that goes the other way as well. If we have reduced flask charges used, increased flask charges gained becomes unavailable. We want one of these two. Ideally, we also want flask effect duration as well. How do you get these on there? How do you force them on there? You don't. You chaos spam, or basically chaos spam them until you get some of these stats. And they don't have to be tier 1 by any stretch, especially earlier on in a league, but if you can get some of these stats on there, that's pretty good. Now, just to get like, what is this? Tier 4 increased charges gained and tier 4 flask effect duration, to get both of those on a single belt, that's like 250 chaos orbs. So that is why I say, like, looking at heavy belts as an option with both of these stats on there, sometimes you can buy them for less than it would cost to craft them yourself, and that's pretty good. If there is room to craft life on it, or some useful modifier, life is kind of just a sort of generic fallback, but reduced flask charges gained, increased effective flasks on you is actually a pretty good modifier. That is also an option. Like, that is a good approach for early on in a league, just to buy a belt that has some of those stats and then craft on a useful other crafted modifier to go with them. If you're really looking to kind of push into the next level, that's where you want to try to buy a fractured belt, and you want one of these to be fractured, either flask effect duration or flask charges gained, or reduced flask charges used is an option, but that's going to be a pretty expensive fractured base, probably. If you get lucky and you find one cheap, that's great, but I would say that's usually going to be kind of expensive. So you're looking for some sort of belt that has one of those stats fractured. So we'll go ahead and say it is like a fractured T3 flask charges gained. Then what we would do is we would just chaos spam until we get another flask suffix. And we'll just, oh my god, hey, perfect. All right, we got another flask suffix. That's great. Flask effect duration, flask charges gained, a couple of prefixes. Don't really need any of those prefixes. Those are both terrible. So what we would do here is we would craft on the metamod suffixes can't be changed, and then we would hit it with a veiled orb, a veiled chaos orb. And we got flask life recovery rate. That's actually not a great stat, kind of not something we want. We don't want our life flask to really be that much faster. I mean, it's fine, if you get it, you can kind of just live with it, but that's funny. They really want us to have mana and energy shield. Hey, that looks a lot nicer. All right, great. So here we would have one prefix, and then we would have an empty empty prefix, and a veiled prefix. So we would want to craft on mana first to block that as being something that we could unveil. And then what we're looking for is reduced flash charges gained and flasks applied. Do you have increased effect? Which, hell yeah, we got that. And now then we can craft on just some other useful prefix. Since we got life here, you know, if we hadn't gotten life or if we hadn't unveiled this, we could just craft that. But since we got, let's call it lucky by me hitting undo and reforging until I was happy with the prefixes, we could just craft on like damage. I'll take 17% increased damage. Nothing wrong with that. And there you go. That's a damn good belt. If we wanted to really like shoot for the moon, go nuts with a belt, we would want to start with a Stygian Vice, and we'll go to jewelry here, not an amulet. What am I doing? Jewelry, belt, Stygian Vice, and we would want that to be a hunter belt. And what item level do we want that to be? That would need to be at least 84 to get that shot at a T1 increased flask charges gained. And let's just double check the hunter prefixes as well. The good ones, the best one is item level 84. So we'd want to start with an item level 84 hunter, non-influence belt. We would start with specifically a non-influence Stygian Vice at item level 84. And now we're going to do something that sucks. We're going to essence spam it. Now, we have a couple of options here for essences that we could spam on there. We can either use Essence of Horror, which gives you Alchemist Genius when you use a flask. Now, we get Alchemist Genius through a cluster jewel, but it is an option that you could do this, and then that kind of frees up your cluster jewel a bit. You could also do Insanity. That'll give you increased movement speed during any flask effect. Yeah, not the best. Or we could do, where's the other one? Delirium. 50 Chaos Res during any flask effect. Pretty nice. We would want to spam this until we got a flask effect suffix, which is, you know, kind of brutal. Flask charges gained or flask charges whatever. Although I actually got that a couple of times in a row, so that's pretty tight. We would do this for a while until we got a flask charges gained suffix that we liked. We were happy with that. And I mean, man, 50 Chaos Res during any flask effect. It's just 50 Chaos Res as a suffix. That's so much. Then what we would want to do is we would want to craft the prefix. Suffixes can't be changed. And we would want to Ashling. So we'll do a Syndicate. We'll get an Ashling Veil. And we're actually hoping to hit that maximum energy shield here. Nice. Okay. At this point, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to, instead of the suffixes can't be changed, we're going to want to craft mana, and we're going to want to unveil and hope we get reduced flask charges gained. Flasks have increased effect. Very nice. Then we're going to check up here at the hunter stuff, and there's not really anything that we can block with the Hunter Exalted Orb. We would want to tap a Hunter Exalted Orb on this bad boy and hope that we get anything other than flask charges when you deal a crit. We did. We got increased chaos damage, which is pretty good. And then finally we could craft on life, and that's a pretty good Stygian Vice. Now, if you really wanted this to be absolutely buck wild, you would have spammed essences on it until you got 2 flask suffixes. So you would have gotten like flask charges gain and flask effect duration, or reduced flask charges used and flask effect duration. That would be the move to really spend a ton of currency on this, getting an absolutely insane end game belt that would be a rival to like a Mage Blood or a Headhunter. Alternatively, you can just use a Mage Blood or a Headhunter. You know, if we're really looking at super in-game belts, they add a lot of freedom, a lot of simplicity to the build. Ironically, with how expensive they are, they really just make it so that, like, you know, you can zoom around super easy, and you can like fix all your mana very easily with a Mage Blood. With a mana cost of skills flask and a Mage Blood, you just totally make your mana trivial. And that is really my preferred end game belt. But, you know, this is a pretty good option as well. If instead of that strength, we had actually spammed essences until we got like really good flask suffixes for it. Something like that. That would be an absolutely insane belt. Let's talk about the chest that you wear. You wear a lightning coil. This is actually super easy. So during the campaign, you'll wear whatever 4-link green, whatever chest you can get that has some life and good links on it if you don't have good links on your bow, basically. And once you've gotten out of the campaign, maybe you'll wear just, again, whatever chest has like stats that help with the rest of your gear or resistances or life or whatever. But basically your goal is to switch over to a lightning coil pretty much as quickly as you can. And the only real thing that you're going to want to do to like play around with this, make this any better, is just look for good corruptions. So I have increased damage here. That's pretty good. You could look for +1 to max all res. That's pretty good. If you're using a Widow Hail as your weapon, you could look for +1 to gem levels, so socketed gems. And that then would be your main 6-link. Your chest with the +1 to all socketed gems would be your preferred 6-link setup. And then your Widow Hail would be where you would run your Mana Forged Arrows support or whatever utility setup you have. And you wouldn't want to run your main Toxic Rain setup in your bow if you're using a Widow Hail. That's pretty much it. Before moving on, though, I do want to talk about stats and resistances. You need extra light res due to the lightning coil. You need at least 60 over what would have normally been the cap. So normally the amount that you need to cap is 135 because you need 75 to cap, and then 60 to compensate for the 2 Kitava debuffs. This bumps that up by another 60, so you need 195 to cap. But you also need extra lightning res and extra cold res, like 60% more, to offset the Eater of Worlds Altars debuff, and probably a little bit more for exposure. So you need like 255 light res at a minimum, and then I guess 195 cold res kind of as a minimum. Your int requirement is 111 for a level 21 efficacy, so 111 maybe if you're going with a 21 efficacy, I guess 113. The early tree that leads up in the passive tree up to Eldritch Battery, which I do prefer for early on in League, just for making mana trivially easy, will totally fix that, right? You pass through a ton of int nodes on the way up there, but you do need int later on. You'll need like one piece of gear with int later on. A good way to make sure your int requirement isn't too high is to make sure your flame dash isn't over leveled. Like right now mine is at level 14. You can stick with a level 1, it's not a big deal, but you know, you can level it up like 5-10 times or whatever. You're going to need some amount of int for malevolence and for efficacy, and getting your flame dash up into that region and then not leveling it anymore is a good approach. Strength, your base strength requirement is going to be like 96. This is relatively easy to hit, but it's important to pick up a bit of strength somewhere, and it's a major reason why we don't run determination. That would push our strength requirement up to 155. And then the other reason that we don't run determination is blue altar downsides that will remove a massive amount of our flat fizz damage reduction, which kind of zeroes out the value of determination as well. All right, now let's talk about rings. The basic rings that you're going to want to run at League start, what a shock, are just going to be rings that have life and stats. Again, not super complicated. It could be any of these. So if Sapphire, Topaz, Ruby, Two Stone, I mean, it could be amethyst rings, it could be coral rings, whatever. You're just looking for stuff with life, stats, resists. And then if you're able to get a mana cost, minus mana cost of skills crafted prefix, then that would be like, okay, this isn't a perfect ring by any stretch, but let's say it were, let's say it looked more like this, right? That's a pretty decent start of the League ring. And then I would just take this and I would craft minus mana cost of skills on it once I had unveiled enough Elrion rings to get that crafted modifier. That would be like a ring that would hold me over for the first several days of the League easily. One of those in each on each finger, good to go. And what you would do is you would just self-cast the Despair early on. A lot of people will do that permanently. They will just permanently hand cast Despair for the entire League. I prefer not to. I really prefer a Despair on hit ring, and so we're just going to take a look at how you would make one of those, because that is kind of a big quality of life improvement that I really like to get myself sort of in the mid game as we're kind of pushing into end game. So you'll want at least an item level 80 base. I prefer an amethyst ring. Doesn't have to be, but it does help with with getting your chaos res up, right? Item level 84 is better, but it is more expensive. The reason you would want item level 84 is to get just some of these stats in here, like the T1 cold, fire, and lightning res. That's pretty much it. You could settle for 80, that's fine. what you're looking for is a hunter ring. You could buy a hunter base, or you can buy a regular base and a hunter exalted orb. Usually that is more expensive. And what we're looking for is curse enemies with despair on hit, right? So the best way to get this on, as we can see, it's a caster and a curse. Those are the two tags. There isn't a way to reforge stuff to get curse, but you can reforge caster with the harvest bench. And as you can see, there are only 3 things that have the caster tag. There is increased cast speed, which has a really high weight. And then there's despair or elemental weakness, which both have relatively low weights. So if we throw that in here into the emulator, and here we go. We'll say it's an amethyst ring just because, and we'll call it an 84 item level base just for funsies. And we're just going to reforge caster until we get a despair ring that we're happy with. This is not one that I'm really thrilled with. I don't love the prefixes. I don't love that life regen per second, but the all res is okay. So like if we wanted to settle with this, we could just craft non-channeling mana cost onto it, and that would be okay. If we really wanted to push this, we could just keep reforging until we got a despair that we really liked. And then, geez, I mean, taking our times actually getting a proper, you know, the weight on getting despair is pretty low, and I keep getting elemental weakness instead, which is a bit annoying, but that's fine. So we would just craft this until we got a despair that we were happy with most of the rest of the stats on, and then craft non-channeling mana costs on it and run with that. Now, I like to pay attention to these because sometimes an elemental weakness ring with good stats will pop up in here, and if that happens, you kind of can just throw that into a sale tab and then buy another one of these and start again. Like this is okay. This isn't amazing by any stretch. If that accuracy rating were like a resistance, that would be pretty amazing, but still, strength, despair, life, non-channeling skills have mana cost. That's pretty decent. If we wanted to, like, let's say we got a really terrible life, like let's say we didn't even get a life roll at all, actually. Let's say we got like this crap, right? Rarity of items found, and we were really happy with the suffixes. Like let's say we had really awesome suffixes. We got, let's slap a T1 chaos res and like a T1 Ellie res. Oh my God, insane. We could craft suffixes can't be changed. And then we could take a veiled chaos to that ring, and we got lucky. We didn't have a full set of prefixes. So what we could do now is we could craft mana just to block mana as an option on the ring. Generally speaking, you want to block mana on rings. Now, depending on the rest of our gear, we might actually want to unveil the mana. I'll show it here. This one right here, mana, maximum mana and reduce mana cost of skills. And if we craft mana on, then that will block that. Like we can craft mana on and look, see, that does get blocked. So maybe that's not what we want to craft. We also don't want any of these damage rolls that we could unveil. So it really depends. If you're trying to actually fish for that relatively low chance of getting max mana and reduced mana cost of skills, if you're not fixing your mana elsewhere in the tree or in your build, that is something you could leave open. But usually you'd want to block mana, and then you would unveil and you would hope for life. Unfortunately, we had like the nightmare scenario where we just got triple damage rolls. So we would want to relock suffixes and tap it with another veiled modifier, and then again we have the same option. We can either block mana or we can block like one of these double elemental damage rolls. We could try blocking that, and what we're looking for here is either mana and mana, like reduced mana cost of skills, which can be fairly uncommon. This can actually take a while to roll, or just we're looking for life, right? So we'll block whatever, fire and lightning damage. Great. What do we unveil? We got crap again. So this can take a bit, obviously. Plus max life and regen mana per second, that works for me. That's normally what you're gonna go with, and that's totally fine. And now you just craft on non-channeling mana skills, and you're pretty much done. There really aren't a bunch of great prefixes on rings for this build. You know, you don't want to increase elemental damage with attacks. You don't really care about rarity or most of any of this stuff. So you can exalt it on, but like you're not going to get anything good, right? The only thing that you really would want, it'd be life, non-channeling mana cost of skills, and then potentially that veiled reduced mana cost of skills prefix. Although usually that's not a part of a Toxic Rain Pathfinder build. That's more something that you would see in like Cast on Crit Forbidden Right. It is something I have used in Toxic Rain Pathfinder when I'm really desperate to fix my mana costs and I don't have the ability to just do that through a flask. But usually I can fix them through a flask and maybe some jewels in the tree. So generally speaking, I would just try to unveil life, craft non-channeling mana skills, and this ring is done. Now let's talk about, like, especially late game where you're running, say, a Mage Blood, or you've done stuff to fix your mana cost of skills. You're not needing another, like, super defensive ring. You're not needing a ring with a ton of different resists or whatever on it. You're really looking to max your damage as much as possible, and you're not worrying about the channeling mana skills prefix. Let's talk about crafting an Iolite ring to absolutely send your damage to the moon. We'll start with jewelry, we'll start with a ring, we're going to go with an Iolite ring base, and we are going to slam dot multi-essences on it, the corrupted essences on it. We'll start with an 84, just in the hopes of getting some good resistance suffixes. But what we're going to do here is we are just going to slam, what is the essence? It is Essence of Delirium. All right, so we're slamming these bad boys on there. We also want to catalyst this before we do anything else, actually, with Noxious Catalysts, so that we get that that increased chaos damage implicit to be 20% stronger. So we're just slamming Delirium Essences on this until we're happy with the suffixes, which kind of happened with the very first one. Not too bad. All right, pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, it really did happen with the very first one. This is also okay. I would prefer not to have dexterity if that were like int or strength or some other resistance. Let's say, hey, chaos. All right, great. Once again, we would do the same basic thing as we have before. We're going to lock suffixes where the suffixes can't be changed. We're going to slap it with a Veiled Orb, and then we're either going to block mana with a crafted prefix, or we're going to block one of these damage rolls, fire and lightning damage prefix. Now, the annoying thing about blocking the damage rolls is you can get cold and lightning, you can get fire and cold, you can get fire and lightning, and blocking any of those, it only blocks the one combination. Whereas blocking mana will block mana and mana recoup, damage taken recouped as mana. It'll block mana and mana cost of skills. It'll block mana and regen life. It'll block mana and regen mana. And the only one of those that we would really want is the incredibly rare one here, mana and reduced mana cost of skills. It's kind of nice to block all the rest of those crappy mana rolls. But whatever, we'll do this. Oh my god, we're loving it. All right, we got this insanely rare option here, and then, you know, maybe we wouldn't have wanted that. Maybe we would have actually just wanted life. I think realistically we would just want life. And now here you go. We can craft whatever we want on that prefix. We probably just want damage on this. This would be if you'd already fixed mana elsewhere in your kit. You would want to craft this ring, and that's basically it. Max life, increased damage, 2 resistances, a nice damage over time multiplier roll. I would probably divine this until I got 15 damage over time multiplier. Let's see if I did that in game. I didn't. Oh, well, I should. But anyways, there you go. There you have a beautiful 15 damage over time multiplier. And then, of course, recraft that damage. Prefix until you get 17. Might take a year. And there you go. You can slap an Exalt on it if you want to get a totally worthless Exalt prefix mod. And that'll work. Okay, now we're moving into some of the more basic armor crafts, and we'll just start with a helm. As for a basic League start helm, what you're really looking for is something that'll, just like everything else, have life, stats, resistances, whatever you need to make your build work and actually be resistance capped. Generally speaking, you're going to look for something that is a dex base. It can be dex int, it can be dex strength, but you want some kind of dex on it just so that it's easier for you to afford to equip it stat-wise. We have a lot of options here, and I'll just go ahead and open up helms. A lot of options here. Any of these can be pretty decent early on. Not really anything all that complicated about it. You know, you just get yourself some good life rolls, some res rolls. There you go. Insane, totally insane League starter helm that I just tapped 3 Chaos Orbs onto a center tricorn and got. Sick. Now, one thing you will want to do with the start of League is you will want to have AoE gems, +1 to level of socketed AoE gems, and increased area of effect. You will want to craft that onto your helm and your gloves. You want to get at least 19% between 2 crafted modifiers, and those spots, there's only 3 spots where you can get AoE in crafting, and that'll be your helm, your gloves, and your neck. And neck prefixes are quite a bit more valuable. There's quite a bit better options you can get, minus non-channeling mana skill cost. That's really the best prefix you could get, or even just like life. You definitely don't want to get area of effect from your neck if you can help it, and so that's really why you would want to get it from your helm and your gloves once you have unveiled and learned this crafted prefix. That is super important for the Toxic Rain pod overlaps. You need 39% AoE, and you get 20% from the tree from the Bow Mastery, which I like to pick up here, 20% there, and so then you need to pick up the other 19% from prefixes, which you can just craft on. That's sort of your starter gear. That's true for both helm and gloves. And there's sort of some like, there's a lot of mixing and matching that goes on in these particular pieces, helmet, gloves, and boots, where a lot of the stuff, the life is kind of a given. You want that on every piece. The resists, the int, the strength, whatever else is in there, that can all be mixed and matched. But there are a handful of very specific things that you want to have on each piece that can only be had on that piece. So like, the helm and the gloves, you have to have crafted AoE prefix on those. The gloves, you can only get attack speed on the gloves, and you really want to have that attack speed on the gloves. The boots, you can only have move speed on boots, and you really do want to have that move speed. That sort of thing. So now let's move into crafting what would basically be an in-game helm. This is not nearly as expensive as a craft as like the +2 neck or a quiver. We would start with an item level 85 Lion's Pelt. That is the preferred base, and you would want, I think Fractured T1 Life is what I really prefer to go with. I would probably not bother doing this if I only had like Fractured T2 Life, but Fractured T1 Life, that's good for me. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to spam Loathing Essences on this until I am happy with the suffixes. Loathing Essences give you increased mana reservation efficiency of skills, and this really helps with getting your skills, all of your auras locked in and not requiring like a level 4 Enlighten, which is insanely expensive. You can just spam this out until you're happy with your suffixes. Okay, Fire Res and Int, we'll say that works. Maybe this Fire Res should be a little higher item level or a higher roll. Let's say it's T1. Bam. T1 Fire Res, and we'll say T2 Int. All right, sick. Great. Now what we're going to do here, we've got these good suffixes. We're going to, as always, lock suffixes and then use a Veiled Chaos. So we'll craft suffixes can't be changed, and then we will just slap it with a Veiled Chaos. And then we didn't mess with our fractured prefix, obviously. We don't have any other prefixes on there, so we can craft a very cheap mana craft and unveil. And what we are looking for is +2 to AoE skill gems, socketed AoE skill gems, and then, +8 to 10% AoE. So we didn't get that, unfortunately, so we would need to recraft. Suffixes can't be changed. Slap it with a Veiled Chaos, block mana, and unveil. And we just repeat that until we get not +2 to level socketed projectile gems, but until we get +2 to socketed AoE gems. Just repeat, repeat, repeat. This process, super important to remember every single time to always craft suffixes can't be changed before hitting the Veiled Chaos so that you don't just wipe away your beautiful suffixes here. And always important to remember to craft that veiled or that crafted mana on before unveiling so that you're blocking mana. Okay, hey, there we go. All right, +2 to level of socketed AoE gems, and then 8 to 10% increased area of effect. We would want that to be 9, so we would probably tap that with a Divine or 2 until we got 9 on it. And then what we're gonna craft is our preferred crafted prefix, if I can find it here. Fizz from damage taken, or from hits taken as fire. And we're gonna craft that until we get 8%, couple of taps, 8% of Fizz from hits taken as fire damage. That's great. We also wanna have the correct implicit, so we're gonna use Eldritch Embers to craft those as well. We will craft using Eater of Worlds. We're going to craft Fizz taken as light. That's my preferred. I mean, you can do any of them, Chaos, whatever, that also works. But since I am using a Topaz flask, but not the other flasks, Ruby, sapphire. I mean, if you're using those, then it doesn't matter which elemental type you're taking. You're taking reduced of all of those, but you wouldn't want it to be chaos because you do take more chaos than you do elemental damage. But you would just slap this until you got the correct implicits, which for Eater of Worlds would be Fizz taken as something that's not Fizz, preferably lightning damage. And that doesn't have to be T1. That can just be, you know, whatever, cheapo, Ichor, that's fine. And then you would want to slap with Exarch currency as well until you get reduced mana cost of skills. That is very important here. You do want that. That really helps with mana costs a lot. Mana cost of attacks, excuse me. Reduced mana cost of attacks. It's not a super low weight, so you just do that with, I like to do it with like the greater embers until you get 22% reduced mana cost of attacks. There you go. Pretty great helm. You're feeling pretty good here. If you need more reduced mana cost of attacks or whatever, you can use, what are they called? Orb of Conflict to try and shoot that number up. And then you would need to reroll your Eater implicit if you were to like clear it off. Let's say you used Orb of Conflict all the way up until you got this to like a tier 3. You would then need to re-Eater implicit your way back up to having Fizz taken as whatever, lightning or fire or whatever you like. And that pretty much does it. You know, I'm usually, gear-wise, I'm usually able to get away with like tier 4 of both of these or tier 5 of both of these. That's fine. But if you need to Orb of Conflict your way up to having even more reduced mana cost of attacks to make your build work, that's something you can do. Okay, I want to cover one unique helm that used to be really popular with Toxic Rain Pathfinder setups, and that is the Devouring Diadem. It is an energy shield helm. It drops from the Betrayal in-boss, and it has a veiled prefix or veiled suffix on it, so you could get one of several different stats. By far the best stats setups are Strength and Int, or one of the various resistances, which are, you know, Fire, Lightning, or whatever, and also Chaos. Pretty nice. The strengths of this helm were pretty good. First off, this is very underrated. You have this ability that it randomly casts, or casts every 5 seconds, Feast of Flesh, which would eat nearby corpses and give you a bunch of life, mana, and energy shield back. So it's just really, really good for kind of keeping you sustained, like to a shocking degree. And more importantly, it would give you 25% reservation efficiency and +1 to level of all the socketed gems in your helm. So it would great setup for like your auras, basically. It would give you kind of a free Enlighten. It would also give you plus levels on your Enlighten. So a +3 Enlighten would become a +4 Enlighten. It just really helped a lot with that sort of thing. The reason you don't run it, the real problem with it is an energy shield base, and because of the changes that were made in 3.23 to Toxic Rain, you now have to get 19% AoE from your gear, because they changed the quality bonus to be base duration, which is a DPS increase, instead of the previous one, which was 10% increased AoE. So instead of getting 9% from your gear, you now have to get 19. And the two best spots to do that are gloves and helm. And obviously you can't get AoE on this Devouring Diadem. There's also the issue of it not having evasion rating and there being this amazingly powerful mastery that you could pick up 15% spell suppression if equipped helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots all have evasion rating. It did have some real advantages to it. It would give you Eldritch Battery. So if you were up here in the Eldritch Battery setup at the start of a league and you were taking like these nodes here, Influence and taking Atrophy, and some of these nodes over here, it would save you several passive tree points. I played around with it still some more recently. It's not as good. There's a reason it's fallen out of favor, but it is worth mentioning because some older guides will definitely reference it. Maybe the biggest issue with it is that because you're using Eldritch Battery, because you're spending Energy Shield, you do not trigger Mana Forged Arrows, because Mana Forged Arrows require spending mana, and this game is very literal. If you spend Energy Shield instead of mana, you can't trigger Mana Forged Arrows. That would need Shield Forged Arrows, which doesn't exist. So this is dead. I did play around with it even some this league, like in Affliction. I played around with it for like a day just for like convenience sake when I was still transitioning some gear around. It is pretty nice to have Eldritch Battery if you're willing to accept not having Mana Forged Arrow support. But I looked on the PoE Ninja leaderboards, whatever, and I don't remember exactly what all things I was looking at, but basically I was the only person in the entire world still using this ancient helm and playing Toxic Rain at like level 99 plus. So it's dead, and you know, RIP. All right, now let's talk about some basic league start gloves. You're gonna want life, stats, resists, all the usual stuff. Not really a surprise at this point, right? There is one extra thing, just like with the helm, where you're gonna want to have a crafted AoE prefix on those gloves. As soon as you can get it, that really does help your damage in single target situations quite a bit. So, you know, just get yourself some gloves, whether you pick them up or buy them from somebody for super cheap. You're just looking for gloves that have like life, resistances, maybe some kind of stats. If they have attack speed on them, that's pretty dope. But if not, that's really not the end of the world. And then you craft socketed AoE gems plus 1 of those, and then just tap it with basically tap this number until you get the correct amount of increased area of effect between your helm and your glove, so that you have a combined total of 19 from your gear and then 20% from your passive tree, and that'll give you 39. All right, there you go. Basic starter gloves, good to go, ready to like make your way through most of the early parts of the end game. When you want to craft some like truly high-end gloves, really push deep into the game, you're going to want to buy an item level 85 base. Now, it doesn't have to be stealth gloves or slink gloves, but those are better, generally speaking, than some of the like murder mitts. But murder mitts, whatever, anything that's like a hybrid base will be generally quite a bit cheaper. So that's a pretty decent way to save yourself some currency. Just like with a helm, you're going to be looking for a T1 fractured life base with item level 85. And so we're just going to slap this on here. Maximum life, T1, fractured. All right. And what we're going to do is we are going to spam Essences of Zeal. So we are forcing attack speed on here with the Essences of Zeal. And if we look at the crafted modifier, this is important. If we look at the crafted modifier for attack speed on gloves, it is 7 to 12%. So unlike with Quivers, where the crafted modifier is really close to a T1 essence roll, that's not the case with our bow, or with our gloves here. Our gloves, we get a substantial amount more attack speed, like up to 5 or 6% more attack speed by using essences, which is pretty significant. And getting attack speed onto our gloves is actually pretty hard to force on. Also, T1 attack speed on gloves is only 14 to 16% as a base roll. So using essences, we are getting above the baseline roll. So really, really valuable to use Essences of Zeal on the gloves. And what we do is we just spam it until we get really happy. We get suffixes that we're really happy with. So like, let's say we got cold res and chaos res, or let's say we got chaos res and T2 suppress. Pretty good. What we would do here is we would once again lock our suffixes. So we would craft suffixes can't be changed, and then we would slap it with yet another veiled chaos. As usual, we would want to block mana, and then we would unveil, and we are looking for AoE gems and AoE effect, increased AoE. And so we're just going to keep doing that here. All right, we got our +2 to level socketed AoE gems and 8% AoE. So we would probably want to tap that with a divine or two until we can get it to at least 9 or 10, depending on what our helm is at. And then from here, we would craft the prefix, if I can find it, increased damage during flask effect. So this is actually a pretty decent amount of damage, 24 to 28% increased damage during flask effect. And that's pretty good. Now, as for our implicits, what we want on this is we want to use Eater to get suppress spell damage. Okay, that came pretty quickly. Chance to suppress spell damage with Eater, that's, you know, with Icarus, that's pretty good. And with using Exarch currency, what we're looking for is we really have two options. We want chaos damage over time multiplier. That is the better option from Searing Exarch. So we can see here, there's not a ton of great options. Attack speed is pretty good. Very early on in a league when you're not like elemental ailment immune, getting extinguish is actually pretty good because it will make it so that you're making enemies incapable of inflicting elemental ailments pretty much all the time. That can be a pretty cheap way to sort of get ailment immunity at the very start of a league, but it's not really something you want to rely on long term. And then what we're looking for here is we're just looking to either get attack speed, which is okay, or chaos dot multi from this Exarch currency. And so we'll just say, yeah, we got that. All right. Suppress spell damage, chaos dot multi, T1 life, +2 socketed AoE gems, attack speed, chaos rest, suppress damage, and then crafted damage during flask effect. Insanely strong. Pair of gloves here, total in-game gloves. You're set for the rest of the league with these gloves. Just like with gloves and helm, the basic item that you're going to want at league start is going to be something that has life stats, resist, and so on. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned with those other two pieces is spell suppression. I haven't really talked that much about it. In a more normal setup, a more normal talent tree, you're coming down through this line of talents or this line of passives down here. And so you are passing by some really good suppression nodes. These here, and then potentially you can even scoop up these here. So there is, you're also getting... usually you would come through here until you've hit like a level 99, 100, like super optimized tree. You would come through this area here, picking up a lot of suppression on the tree. And I do have some suppression from charms in the current setup, 12%. That obviously won't be in the next league, presumably, but there will be some sort of league mechanic. And there's a ton of suppression to be picked up throughout the tree as a Pathfinder. So generally speaking, you don't need to get much suppression on your gear. It's just sort of, there's a lot of freedom, right? You can pick up suppression, or you can pick up other stats and then kind of configure your tree accordingly. So with boots, the main thing that you're really looking to get is move speed and life. That is the goal. You get move speed, life, and then fill in whatever else. So in terms of doing an in-game craft, what you're going to want to look for are item level 85 slink boots. That's the highest level dexterity boots, I believe, if I scroll down. Yep, there we go. Slink boots. Highest level evasion boots. We do like evasion. That is our primary defensive attribute. And that's what we're going to go with. And we're looking for a chaos fractured res. Now, there are a lot of other options. We could do a suppress fracture. That's usually a lot more expensive than a chaos fracture. And again, it's kind of easier for us to get suppress than it is to get chaos. I mean, we're not getting any chaos res out of our tree, really. So, we're getting potentially quite a bit out of our tree of suppression. So getting that chaos fracture just sort of helps with the rest of our gearing. So if T2, T1, whatever, get one of those. And then what you want to do, there are several approaches to crafting your boots. Some people will just craft up so that they have very good suffixes, and then they will lock those suffixes and then veil to get prefixes. So like, let's say we had this as our suffixes, although that fire res isn't particularly good. Let's say we had like T1 fire res, let's say T1 suppress, and T1 chaos res. This is a pretty normal craft right here to then make it so suffixes can't be changed. Veil, craft mana to block that mana, and then unveil and look for move speed. This is really normal. This is a typical approach. You get yourself an unveiled move speed, then you craft life on. Totally works. I prefer to go with a different approach where you use Zeal, and you don't need T1 Zeals because T1 Zeals will only give you 32% increased move speed, whereas T2 Zeals, which cost 1/3 as much, will give you 30%. 30% move speed, great. Definitely can tell the difference between 25 and 30. 30 and 32, can't tell the difference, don't care. I did not fracture this Chaos Res. Okay, so normally what I would do is I would start with just like a fractured Chaos Res base, and then I would just slap T1 or T2 Zeals on it, rather, T2 Zeals, until I am happy with the life that I have on the piece of gear. Just slap them on there, get a nice life roll, bam, there we go. Absolutely amazing set of prefixes there, super happy with them. And then I would use Eldritch crafting to craft the suffixes until I'm happy with them. And so we look at these suffixes here, as I can never remember which ones do which. And here it is. Okay, Eater of Worlds is dominant, remove a suffix modifier. So we just slap a lesser Ichor on there, and then we don't like any of these suffixes. Let's say hypothetically we didn't. We just use Eldritch Annuls to knock them off, and then depending on the price of Eldritch Exalteds versus regular Exalteds are usually cheaper. If our prefixes are all full up, we don't need to use Eldritch Exalteds. We can just slap regular Exalts, and then we can just play the classic game of Annul Exalt, which, yeah, just do that. Just Eldritch Annul and then regular Exalt until we are happy with our suffixes, and just basically repeat that until the suffixes are like to our liking. pretty straightforward and honestly like a way to make some pretty good boots. I mean, I just did this right here that easily. Now, as for the Eldritch Implicits, action speed, that's really the best here, action speed, and you want to try to get this number up. The best way to improve it is just to roll it on with like the, what is this, the tier 5 Eldritch, the Greater Embers. You tap that until you get that tier 5 action speed, and then you would use Orb of Conflict to try to lower the Eater of Worlds and get that 5% action speed. Excellent. Worth a divine or whatever it costs to buy an Orb of Conflict. Definitely worth that to get that extra % of action speed. Pretty nice. And then for Eater affixes or implicits, they're really not that great. Let's see what we have here. So I've played around with a chance to avoid bleeding. You can do chance to avoid elements. I usually just use Purity of Elements. That really helps a lot with resistances. I really like the Purity of Elements Watcher's Eye mod where you get Fizz converted to Elemental. I think that's really good. And if you do that, then you are element immune and you definitely don't need chance to avoid elements. So I'll usually go with like either chance to avoid bleeding or being poisoned. Those are both okay. Or I kind of just like doing a cooldown rate of recovery skills. It has a decent weight and it's kind of nice to get 18 to 20% cooldown reduction on Withering Step and Flame Dash. And it feels okay to have that. Otherwise, there's not anything all that great. Elusive effects, not really that great because the only sorts of elusive we get is our Withering Step, and I'd rather have it up more often than have it more powerful when it comes up. Most of the other options here, pretty worthless. So that's it. That's all it really takes to craft some nice boots. Okay, now let's craft some cluster jewels and talk about those. We'll start with the large cluster jewels, and the base that you want on the large cluster jewels is chaos damage. If you look at bow damage, the notable skills that you get from them, not particularly good. Attack damage, same situation. Chaos damage is definitely where the best notables are available. And what you want here is Wicked Paw and Unwaveringly Evil as your two prefixes. Those are far and away the two best. Wicked Paw giving you damage and skill effect duration. Unwaveringly Evil giving you just the most damage, and then interruption from stuns, which whatever, you're trying to get stun immune elsewhere anyway. The other options here, and I wanted to point this out very specifically, Touch of Cruelty is actually bad. It gives you a chance to hinder enemies on hit with your spells. Toxic Rain's not a spell, so even though enemies hindered by you take 10% increased damage, unless you have hinder somewhere in your kit from spells and you're hitting with spells to accomplish that hinder, you're actually not getting anything out of this notable at all. Overwhelming Malice gives you Unholy Might. That's totally worthless for this build. And Dark Ideation, very, very minor damage increase compared to Unwaveringly Evil and Wicked Paw. So those are the two options locked in for your prefixes. And then your suffixes, you really have two. Unholy Grace is far and away the best of the two that are actually available. Grim Oath being fairly uncommon as well, but Unholy Grace is good. Damage, attack speed, excellent. Unspeakable Gifts is incredibly uncommon. I mean, you see the weight here, it's 0.132%. Very, very, very low weight. But it does give you an explodey effect, a 10% chance when you kill enemies for them to explode, doing a quarter of their max life as chaos damage. It's really nice. And with the end of this league taking away this type of charm here, the cursed enemies you and your minions kill have a chance to explode, doing a quarter of their life as max life is chaos damage. Like, losing that explodey, it will be nice to have Unspeakable Gifts. I never run Unspeakable Gifts. For one, you get an actual tangible, measurable DPS increase out of Unholy Grace, but I have used Unspeakable Gifts clusters on like cast on crit Forbidden Right, and then gone and thrown it back onto a Toxic Rain build and been like, oh man, that's exactly what this is missing. It's missing explodey. So it's nice to have. If you somehow manage to roll this yourself, keep it or sell it off. You might make a lot of currency out of it, but know that that's not really what you're pursuing. So in terms of how you actually craft these bad boys, there's really two options for doing your cluster jewels. Obviously, you always want to start with an 8-socket cluster jewel. The item level doesn't really matter. 84 item level and up gives you the ability to get some of the like nicer small passives, like instead of added small passive skills give 2 to 3 or 4 to 7 life, they give 8 to 10. Woo, who cares? So just whatever level is fine. You just have to hit the bare minimum, which I think is like 50 for Wicked Paul. Yeah, geez. Okay, so literally any cluster jewel at all that's a chaos cluster with eight passives is going to be sufficient. So you have two options here on how you want to craft. You can either do what I prefer to do, which is slower but a lot cheaper, and that is to just slam them with alts and just try to get two notables, try to get Unwaveringly Evil and Unholy Grace on a piece. But like, I will just sit here and I will just alt Regal, nope, got crap, all right, scour, and then just repeat doing this over and over again until I get a cluster jewel that's good. And it usually is not that, like, it's not that expensive to do this approach, just doing it like this. It can be time consuming, but you're trading the amount of time that you're spending for not spending a lot of currency doing it. Now, the faster way to do this is, I probably should have just scoured that. The faster way to do this is to slap these with, and I need to alch this up, slap them with fossils, and you'll want to use aberrant fossils, just more chaos. That's it. That is the cheapest, most effective way to do this craft quickly. You just slap them with fossil. I mean, Touch of Cruelty is not what we're going for, right? We are going for Wicked Paul, Unwaveringly Evil, and Holy Grace, but as you can see, that was pretty quick. And you just want to slam this, slam aberrant fossils into the, again, yeah, Touch of Cruelty, but we can even check with the fossil crafting method tool here, the calculator, to see like how quick is it to get these three notables: Unholy Grace, Unwaveringly Evil, and Wicked Paul. And if we compute best selection, that'll take a moment here, but it's going to come up as aberrant as the cheapest. And I think, if I remember from looking at this before, it's about 111 tries, which at the start of a league, you know, right now that's 884 chaos, bit expensive. But at the start of a league, that might be half as much chaos or even less than that. And, you know, this is a pretty amazing cluster jewel that'll last you, I mean, whole league, life of the character, really. So that works pretty well. This is a reason why I like Harbinger at league start. It gives you a lot of the materials you need to do early cluster jewel crafting, especially like, let's say that this was, instead of Touch of Cruelty, like, let's say we had alt spammed this, regaled it up, and we'd gotten lucky and we'd gotten Wicked Paul, Unwaveringly Evil, and Unholy Grace here. Great. Slap an Exalt on it and hope you get something good, right? Having Exalts around. So like, let's say that we had a pretty good suffix here. Chaos. Let's say Chaos Res. Wicked Paul, Unholy Grace, and Chaos Res. We had regaled our way into Chaos Res. I would want to slap an Exalt on this and hope it was good. And then if it wasn't, I would try to scour or annul off the bad prefix. And then, okay, it bricked. Now I scour and then go back to it. So I do blow through a lot of the Harbinger crafting materials at league start, trying to craft up some nice cluster jewels. And, you know, that's why I like just farming them up myself, so I'm not having to deal with the time wasting aspect of trading to get Harbinger currency. Now let's talk about medium cluster jewels. We only need one of a specific type of medium cluster jewel, and that is the Flask Duration cluster jewel. We want one specific notable from this, and it's not brewed for potency, although that is the second best option here. We want Spiked Concoction. So we want Spiked Concoction because it gives us Alchemist Genius whenever we use a flask. Alchemist Genius gives us increased flask effect and increased flask generation, and it lasts for 5 seconds. We're using a flask about every 5 seconds. So, you know, massive increase in value to our flask generation and effect, and also 5% more attack speed. Pretty good notable. And then brewed for potency is the second best option, so we want both of those. As we can look and see here, there aren't really any good, there are no shared tags between the two, and there aren't really any good tags available at like any way to really craft either of these on. So we can look at like a best fossil, but I think we already know that fossils are a terrible way to craft this, and the best way to do it is alt spam, just alt and try to regal your way into, yeah, see, like 1500 1400 chaos to just fossil spam. Terrible. Not good at all definitely not the approach you want to take. And then again, chaos spam is like hundreds of chaos. The best approach here is to alt spam. It really doesn't take a lot to get one of these two on there, and then just try to regal and potentially exalt your way to, you know, if you regal on a suffix, try to exalt on one of the other two as the other prefix, and that winds up being really cheap. As for your other medium cluster jewels, depending on how many large cluster jewels you're running, if it's one or two, you're either your one other one or your three other ones. The cheaper approach is to run medium chaos damage over time clusters. They are better for early end game, I think, and the prefixes you want, there are really four good options here. Wicked Paul is the best. It's all the way down here. A lot of options on this. Wicked Paul is the best, and then you have three different alternatives. I prefer Student of Decay because it gives you pretty competitive damage, not the best, but pretty competitive, and it gives you 13 chaos res, so that helps with like one of the hardest stats to fix early on in a league. You can just take Brood for potency. It will give you more damage over time, or technically less damage over time than Student of Decay by 1 entire percent, but it gives you more flask charges, which is also really good, you know, very helpful. And then Unwaveringly Evil gives you a little bit more damage than either of those two, but it's very competitive. And again, the same way that you would want to craft this, you kind of treat it like the large ones you could spam Aberrants on. Like if we just look here, okay, let's just say we wanted basically any of these. Student of Decay, Unwaveringly Evil, Wicked Paul, and Brood for Potency. Let's just say we wanted to fossil spam on, let's say we guaranteed we wanted Wicked Paul, and then we would accept any of the other three. Compute best selection and just see what it says the cost would be doing Aberrant Fossils, because obviously that's going to be the best option here. I think generally speaking, this is going to be not that expensive, 180 chaos, definitely more than it would cost to buy, or more than it would cost to try and alt spam and then alt regal exalt your way to having one of these. But faster, I mean, as you can see, faster for sure. Converted cost for 233 tries, that's not right. Yeah, 1 in 3 tries to get this suffix, I don't know, 29 tries, there we go. Yeah, 29 tries, that's not too bad. Now, if you want the slightly better damage upgrade without any of the utility, and actually not really that much more expensive or difficult to craft, you can go with, I'm looking for it here, what am I, medium projectile damage. Okay, so it would be down here, projectile damage. Medium projectile damage clusters have really only 2 useful notables in here, and those are Repeater and Shrieking Bolts. Repeater grants you 30% increased proj damage and 8% attack and cast speed. This is the best of all of the notables available from medium cluster jewels, and then Shrieking Bolts just gives you 35% increased proj damage. It's pretty good, and this is actually, these are both relatively high weight, so this is actually a pretty easy craft to craft. Like, you wouldn't want to chaos spam your way to it, but if you did, it would be probably under 100 chaos orbs, which isn't bad. I would still want to alt regal my way to having this, but all that being said, a pretty easy craft. Definitely easier than some of the, say, medium chaos dot clusters, but without that utility of getting like Student of Decay. This is purely adding damage, and it is adding maybe 1% more damage than those chaos clusters. All right, now let's talk about flasks, because those are very important. You are a Pathfinder after all. Flasks are definitely a big part of the class. I mean, that is why I love Pathfinder so much. It really makes use of every aspect of the game. Life Flask is definitely something you're going to be using, and you have a really important couple of suffixes or prefix and suffix that you need on here, a couple of important affixes on it. You want increased amount recovered, reduced recovery rate. That is a really important prefix to have, and it is this one right here. Increased amount recovered, reduced recovery rate. Now, 81 item level is required to get the max roll on this. At League Start, you can settle for just something that's like 61 plus on a Divine Life Flask. That is important. Divine Life Flask. Saturated is the T1 roll. You will eventually want to upgrade to that. As you can see, it is 5,080 life over 5.2 seconds. It is qualitied up a bit by having Hillock in, I believe, research. Yeah, Hillock in research will give you increased quality on flasks, and you want to get that really on all of your flasks, but certainly on your life flask. That's really important. It makes it so you don't have to hit as often. You have more regen all the time. That's very useful. And then for suffixes, you want to have bleed immunity on there. You can beastcraft that on. You just go to the menagerie and craft that on. Pretty straightforward. Now, there are several important unique flasks. I'm not going to find those in Craft of Exile. I will show them off here. I have Progenesis. This is a very, very valuable, very expensive flask. It only comes from Ubermaven. And so you're not going to have that at League Start, obviously. But there is a very, surprisingly close in value other unique flask, Taste of Hate. Taste of Hate makes it so that you convert a bunch of fizz damage from hits into cold damage while it's active. The max roll on that is 15%. If you can get a 14 or 15%, that is better. It also helps a lot with maxing your cold res. You'll be way overcapped with cold res with a Taste of Hate active. And it's a great budget alternative to a Progenesis. You really only, Progenesis isn't necessary for the build. It's just a very, very valuable defensive layer that you add on once the build is really taking like its final form. Taste of Hate in the interim does a great job, and with all the increased flask effect that you have from your passives in your ascendancy and just like around the passive tree, you're going to be getting probably 20 something percent of physical damage from hits taken as cold, which is pretty rad. Really, really, really makes you tanky. You can run both of them together if you want to absolutely push your defensiveness to like the moon, but some of that can be a little bit overkill. Whatever. As for utility flasks, at League Start, I always like to run Silver and Quicksilver. Silver used to only just give Onslaught 20% increased attack, move speed, cast speed, all that. That was changed, I don't remember how long ago, but that was changed to be something that could be scaled up with Flask effect and with like things like Enkindling Orbs, which give 70% increased effect. So that is something that is scalable. It's not just the 20% attack and move and so on speed like it used to be. I think this is like several years old, but there are probably some older guides saying that it's not something you would want as a flask. That's not true anymore. So Silver is very good as a flask. Quicksilver is good. Everybody likes to go fast, right? That is the reason I love this build so much. At League Start, I also like to have like a Jade and a Quartz flask just for like more tankiness, more baseline avoiding of hits. That is something I try to phase out. Having a Quartz flask helps with hitting your suppression cap early on when you don't have a lot of passive points, and it also gives you phasing, which is really valuable to have. Now, I prefer to use, if I can find it in my tree here, it is somewhere. I'm sure of it. There it is. I like to use a phasing while affected by Haste Watcher's Eye for a couple of reasons. One, it is very cheap because it is generally regarded as a bad affix, not something that people really want. And also because it removes the need to use Quartz Flask and gives you phasing all the time because you're going to be using haste. So that is like a pretty way to make somebody else's garbage and take it and turn it into treasure, right? And that obviates the need for using a Quartz Flask, which then you can fill in with some elemental resistance flasks. That's a super common and safe approach to just run 2, 3, 4, just be like Ruby, Topaz, and Sapphire. That helps fix your resistances. It's really common and safe approach that makes gearing easy. It sacrifices some damage and speed. A lot of people will do that and then either have a Silver Flask as their 5th flask or a Quicksilver Flask and just lose the Silver Flask. So one of those ways you're losing either damage or speed, kind of both. Topaz is particularly good, and that's why I'm only running Topaz, because of the Lightning Coil. You are taking so much fizz as lightning damage that's specifically locking in on lightning damage, and you have such a massive requirement for extra lightning res because of the Lightning Coil, so really locking in on lightning res, to me, is more important than just like running all 3 of the resist flasks, but that is a pretty good setup. It's very common. Amethyst Flask, which Progenesis is not as good because it only provides chaos res. As you can see, no reduced amount of chaos damage taken, whereas this also gives you less lightning damage taken, and that is increased by your flask effect. The preferred prefixes on all of your flasks, until you've like gone with a Mage Blood and you've gone with the reduced duration increased effect prefix, if I can find some in my flask tab here, there should be tons. Here we go. Perfect example. Increased charge recovery, increased attack speed during effect, use when charges reach full. This is definitely a flask I was using early on in the league. You can see it's item level 73, it's 20 quality, so it's something I was using probably within the first like 3 days of the league. This was a flask that I was like very happy with and then eventually moved on from. But increased charge recovery is a great prefix. Reduced charges per use is a good prefix. Increased duration is a good prefix. You never want to run the reduced effect prefixes ever, no matter what. Anything that reduces the effect is like, that's poison that they put in there just to make it so that you have to roll a lot more to get good flask bonuses, basically. As for actually rolling them, it's all alt and augmentation spam, you know, pretty straightforward. For suffixes, you want attack speed, chance to avoid stun, resistances can be okay, move speed is good, effective curses, reduced effective curses can be good. I prefer to use when I'm not enkindling and doing the whole mage blood thing. I prefer to use when charges reach full, but there is another option. This has slightly worse uptime than use when flask expires. The real difference here is if you make it so that when they expire, they refresh, you'll have higher uptime on average. The problem is that you have to hit the flasks once each time you zone into a map. That's not like a huge requirement. It's not a huge annoyance, but it is an annoyance, and I would rather have them just free cast, totally automated, never have to touch the flasks at all, and maybe lose a little bit of uptime here and there. I've played both a bunch over the years. I do prefer cast when charges reach full though. It's comfortable and it's convenient. As for in-game flasks, not really that much changes. The main thing is that I swap out the Jade and the Quartz flasks for things like Taste of Hate, Progenesis, pretty much that sort of thing. As soon as you get a reduced mana cost crafted suffix from unveiling Cinder Swallow urns from the Betrayal in boss, you want to craft that onto either your Quicksilver or your Topaz flask. Those are the two flasks that are going to have the most uptime, easily the highest uptime. And you definitely want to have it on one of those. You can check your uptime in Path of Building. It's pretty easy to do. And then eventually, once you get Mage Blood, you want to use Enkindling Orbs to increase flask effect to at least 69%. Nice. And reroll all of the utility flask prefixes to 25% increased effect, and then however much reduced duration, it doesn't really matter. The final thing to cover here is rare jewels. I don't bother crafting these at all. My approach is just to pick up and identify jewels I find during the first few leagues of a week and sell any good ones that I wouldn't want to use, and then use any ones that I find that have like life and chaos damage over time multiplier or attack speed, useful stats like that. You can also use rare jewels to fix mana cost. Percent reduced mana cost is usually a pretty cheap modifier. Stats are also usually pretty good and cheap, and resistances are pretty good, although chaos resistance can be kind of expensive. The others are pretty cheap. I don't think a Corrupted Blood immunity jewel is super necessary due to the life flask removing corrupted blood and bleed every few seconds, every 5 seconds or so, but it doesn't hurt to have either. All right, I know that was a lot. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions about crafting anything else or any alternative crafting methods, please leave a comment. One of the great lessons I learned when I was like half my current age is, if it works, you win. And I think that really holds true with crafting gear in Path of Exile. There are tons of problems that players are forced to solve with their gear in this game, and a nearly infinite number of ways that we are capable of solving them. This is just a set of methods that I'm using, and it's the ones that I'm using right now. They could change in the future. Maybe some new crafting methods come along, new crafting ideas. Maybe somebody else discovers a better approach to crafting some of these pieces of gear. If you have, please share. I would love to hear it. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching, and good luck crafting. Bye.